So our next speaker is Devin Rodgers. He is a botanist with the Office of Kentucky Nature Preserves. His talk is titled Inventory, Monitoring, and Management of Rare Plants and Communities in State Nature Preserves and Natural Areas. So this is going to be really interesting, and I will let Devin take it away.
All right. So hello, my name is Devin Rodgers. I'm a botanist with the Office of Kentucky Nature Preserves. I'm going to be going pretty quick through a lot of these slides and covering a lot of our recent efforts to improve some monitoring on some of our nature preserves and natural areas where we're doing a lot of management. Okay, just to give you a little background, the Office of Kentucky Nature Preserves, we're a state agency that are in charge of maintaining a system of nature preserves and natural areas. We also maintain a state rare plant list, as well as listings for natural communities and animals, and that includes conservation ranks and statuses for all those. We also maintain a rare species database, and we protect the state designated Kentucky wild rivers. And we also administer the Kentucky Heritage Land Conservation Fund for conservation land acquisition. And this map just kind of shows a whole variety of lands that we're involved with. Some of them are state nature preserves, and some of them are natural areas. Some of them are areas for which we have a conservation easement with the Kentucky Heritage Land Conservation Fund, as well as some of our wild rivers corridors. We also have a team of dedicated land managers that work on invasive species and removal, prescribed fire, and woody removal, as well as maintenance of road trails and parking lots. We also have a team of biologists that work to conduct biological surveys, which then feeds back into applications of management, as well as some of our conservation decisions with ranks and statuses of variety of species. And lastly, we're involved in a lot of public outreach and environmental education and recreation on some of our nature preserves. We maintain a rare species database with well over 20,000 individual records of plants and aquatic and terrestrial animals, as well as natural communities. And then that data not only feeds into things we do within an agency, but feeds into a biological assessment tool called the KY-BAT, which is a self-service conservation planning tool that allows customers to submit projects and receive data within minutes, and that's available at our website. Now, to give a little overview, there are 6 ecoregions. We have preserves all over the state, but there are 6 ecoregions where we have some preserves where we're doing some increased monitoring and management, places where we've done a lot of management in the past, but we're trying to step up our monitoring efforts because these are some of our most important, pristine, and sensitive areas. And of the places that I'll be talking about today, there's approximately 15 nature preserves and natural areas where we're improving some of our monitoring. And of these nature preserves and natural areas where we're improving our monitoring, also continuing to manage them, there's approximately 75 rare and watch list plant species, which are about 13.6% of the track species in the state. as well as 13 rare communities comprising 36% of the rare communities we recognize. Now, if we go back to the map showing where a lot of our preserves are, I highlighted in these black polygons some of the areas where we are doing a lot of improved monitoring and management. And a lot of these areas were originally identified and protected following the Natural Areas Inventory program in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. This program attempted to systematically survey the entire state for the most high quality natural areas, and a lot of the highest quality areas that they recognized ended up becoming nature preserves or conservation easements, natural areas. And during that effort, there was a lot of original documentation of rare species that formed the crucial backbone of the rare species database that we continue to build on and monitor today. Now, additionally, at the present day, we've inherited, years of successful management on some of these preserves that we own or are involved with. And we're trying to just continue that management as well as expand it. And so the focus for this talk really is about our efforts to expand monitoring for our rarest grasslands and wetlands, because these are some of the places that require the most intensive management. And so because there's more frequent and more intense management, we want to make sure that we have enough relevant data to be able to assess what we're doing. And lastly, we're just trying to build on the excellent work of previous scientists, land managers, and conservationists. So broadly, what we wanted to do with some of these places where we're doing a lot of prescribed fire or woody removal is revisit all known rare plant populations to get updated census data and improved mapping. And additionally, we wanted to set out monitoring plots where we set up 10 by 10 meter plots, 10 by 20 meter plots, 20 by 50 meter plots, different sizes, all with the goal of, and they're all Carolina Vegetation Survey methodology, but all with the goal of capturing cover data for every species in a plot, as well as getting rare species data for that plot and taking photos. These are permanently marked so we can go back and revisit them as many times as we need to in order to monitor changes in vegetation. And another tool we want to start using, there's a lot of statistics that you can use with ecological data, but we want to start using Floristic quality assessment. And just very briefly, this is a statistic that tries to get at the floristic quality, or basically like how high quality is a natural community based off of the plant species that compose that area. And you can score every species in a flora from 0 to 10, those on the lower end being species that are able to tolerate disturbance to natural processes, and those that we consider higher quality or have a higher score end up with, or that's because of their intolerance to disturbance of natural processes. And we can take these values in a given plot and add them up for like an average, and then along with richness values, which are the number of species in a plot, we can enter them into statistics like the Floristic Quality Index, which measures the floristic quality. So why is all this important? Really, some original records may be mismapped or haven't been updated in a really long time. And honestly, we can't assess management without current accurate data. And then when it comes to vegetation monitoring plots, rare species don't tell the whole story because we're not trying to just manage for the rare species, but for the entire system. And then that quantitative data can serve as a baseline for restoration goals, not only for nature preserves, but also for other conservation agencies around the state. And then the combination of the rare plant data with vegetation data yields a more holistic monitoring effort. And then lastly, more botanical research is just needed on protected areas in the entire state of Kentucky. So far, we've set out a total of 146 plots, and you'll see that 44 of those plots have come from our vascular plants out of grasslands. We do have some lichen plots, a couple preserves, and then a lot of the other ones come from Appalachian wetlands like the acid seeps on Pine Mountain and the Cumberland Plateau. So first I'm going to just breeze through a couple nature reserves and natural areas for which we actually have some preliminary data. And up in the outer bluegrass, we have a preserve that hosts a rare community, a globally rare community called the Bluegrass Cat Prairie, where there's 17 track species, and we're using a combination of cedar removal, invasive species removal, and prescribed fire to maintain this preserve. So far, we set out 4 vegetation plots, and those vegetation plots not only are trying to assess effects of fire, but also to get community composition, quantitative community composition data on really rare grassland species like the white lady slipper, the earleaf false foxglove, and Indian paintbrush. All 3 of these are just a couple examples of the rare plants there, but are things for which we have less than 5 populations in the state. So we're trying to be good with making sure that they remain healthy going into the future. And here's a photo of our bluegrass land manager, Jess Slade, in one of our plots out counting some rare plants. So when we go and look at some of those statistics I was talking about a second ago, really we're just establishing a baseline here, and we're seeing that there's pretty high FQI values, and going into the future, we want to make sure that if we go back and revisit these plots, that the values stay the same, and we'll just use this as one of many statistics to monitor what is happening in the plant communities. Some fun things come out of the rare plant updates there include two species that had been collected right around 1991 had not been revisited, or I should say, had not been documented again in our natural heritage database since 1991. So it had been about 30 years, but we were able to refine these this year, including it's called Pacropulpercula variety pseudotomentosa and Hoa saltuensis. And not only did we find them, we found a couple populations. So that was pretty exciting. And then additionally, we're learning that sometimes when we revisit our preserves that we're still finding rare species that hadn't been documented for those preserves. We were able to find new populations of a rare honeysuckle, Lanister reticulata, and a rare orchid, Leparis lozelii. So in another region of the state, one of the natural areas in this region is home to 11 state-listed species and has a state rare grassland type that we call the Wet Meadow, otherwise known as a zero hydrate prairie. And we're using prescribed fire and woody removal to continue to maintain the open habitat there. And this protects a couple interesting species like Xyrus torta, Drosera brevifolia, and Asclepias hirtella. And here's a picture of what the habitat looks like. A lot of that grass that you see in there is Andropogon glomeratus. And what's interesting is you see this open grassland, and right behind it, there's a closed canopy forest. And if we don't manage this habitat, it will turn into that closed canopy forest. And that is not the right habitat for all the rare plants that occur there. And in November 2020, just a month ago, we were able to get some prescribed fire into this system, and you can just see how many woody stems and saplings are coming up in here, which is what we want to manage against. And we put 3 plots in the grassland and 3 plots in the forest just to observe some of the differences. And some of it was somewhat predictable from what we're able to qualitatively observe, but we were able to see that because of the decrease in tree and shrub cover, we have a 2 to 3 time increase in the richness, or the number of species that can occur in a given area, as well as a large increase in the floristic quality index. And then lastly, just further illustrating the point that we need management to keep these things open. There's 2 to 6 rare plants per plot in the grassland, and up to 11 in that habitat type, but 0 in the forest. Now, another area we're doing some interesting work to maintain open habitats is on the Cumberland Plateau, where one of our preserves has 5 state listed species and 1 federally listed orchid, and a state rare, globally rare wetland type called the Cumberland Plateau forested acid seep. So we started out just using woody removal, and prescribed fire is hopefully going to happen in the future. So this habitat protects a number of rare orchids like the Southern Appalachian endemic white fringeless orchid, coastal plain species, the yellow crested orchid, and another widespread rare acid wetland orchid, tuberous grass bean. So as a result of the natural area inventories program, they were able to not only identify this rare habitat and acquire the land, turn it into a preserve, but they used a combination of rare plant census data, vegetation plot data, and management. And we're able to really assess how the system changed over time. And they were able to see not only were there increases in rare species populations with management, but also there are increases in floristic richness as well as floristic quality. And management is being expanded in the uplands to include more, with a lot of mid-story removal and restoration of shortleaf and pitch pine savannas. So we want to see how these numbers change as we change the rest of the preserve. So in some additional nature preserves where we're also doing work, include some work on Pine Mountain, where we're trying to keep woody plants from encroaching on some rare wetland types, and we're trying to restore some pine barrens. And these are some photos of some of the plots we've set up on some of the acid seeps that occur on Pine Mountain. And while there was already a lot of mapping in some of these systems, we're finding that there's a few graminoids that maybe hadn't been recognized. But also there's some really neat, unique vegetation composition. And this is kind of happening with along with an effort to try and get seeds of rose begonia, try to propagate rose begonia from the only population in the state, which is on acid wetland on private land. We want to try to find a home for it on one of our nature preserves so that it's more protected. And then this is just demonstrating some of the management that has happened, a lot of prescribed fire and a lot of mid-story woody removal, trying to restore not only the structure of pitch pine savanna, but also increase the populations of yellow false indigo. We, as part of the effort to revisit some of the rare species populations, one of our preserves, we relocated, or we checked up on a population on one of our preserves that we never knew, but we know now because we got updated numbers that it had over 900 plants, and it's the largest population of this Baptisia in the state. Then out on the Pennyroyal Plain, we have just preliminary data for one of our preserves. We have 14 tracked species. We're using a combination of prescribed fire, cedar removal, and invasive species control. And we have a couple vegetation plots, but its data isn't analyzed yet. So we set up plots on both wet glades as well as dry glades. And we were fortunate to have Mason Brock, Kentucky native and botanical expert, join us on one of our plots where he informed us of something that really we hadn't heard about and didn't really know about, which is the presence of this interesting onion species that we suspect is either Allium stellatum, which there's been some confusion about whether or not the plant occurs in the state. But as a result of visiting this preserve with Mason and him bringing it to our attention, part of these monitoring efforts, we're realizing there's still other rare species that we maybe need to recognize as part of our flora and potentially consider it for listing and tracking. And then also, we're still finding additional rare species, like in this plot. As we get down, we're really scrutinizing every plant, trying to get down close and not just notice the obvious charismatic species. We're able to find additional rare species. And then one area, I guess, like we haven't looked at a lot of the plot data yet, but in the Mammoth Cave Hills, we have a few natural areas and preserves where we're doing a lot of prescribed fire, mid-story removal with mastication. And we have a lot of plots out there. So we're excited to see how those plots are going to help us manage habitat for Gentiana puberulenta. And then again, as we're doing these plots, we realize that there are some plants that we see in our plots that we're like, well, that's pretty rare. We might need to consider if that's something that needs to be tracked or added to the state rare plant list. And then lastly, I just wanted to say that there's a lot of plants that we capture, for which we capture data in these plots that are conservative, but for which we do not track. So sometimes these plots are the only way that we can track the status of our conservative plants. And with that, I thank you guys for letting me present, and that's all I have to say.
Great, thank you so much, Devin. I am going to, I think we have like 3 minutes for questions. So I'm going to go to the ones that are the most relevant to your talk, like directed at some of the things you had said. The first being from Jonathan Kubash. He asks, for vegetation, are there any estimates on biomass production, utilization, or soil sampling that you do?
There hasn't been soil sampling yet, nor biomass estimates. We are, I guess, like our first goal was to just get the vegetation data, trying to make as much of a bang for our buck. We really thought, like, let's get our vegetation data and think later about whether or not we want to include some additional things. Soils, I do think soil samples would be a great thing for a whole host of reasons, but we have not done that yet.
Great. Janine Simpson asks, are any of the areas that you've mentioned available for visiting, perhaps with a guide or in small groups?
Yes, somewhat yes. Now, because we were broadcasting this to a lot of people, we didn't want to include specific names of some of these specific places just because of the sensitivity of the data. But I know if you contact some of the leadership at Kentucky Native Plant Society, they can at least lead you to some of our public preserves. And I know sometimes, like, there's been efforts with some of our private preserves to lead hikes on some of them, but obviously not something that we've done during COVID.
Yes, and then Jonathan asks again, any Trifolium reflexum in your plots?
Trifolium reflexum, so we only have a handful of populations in the state, and I think all of them occur on federal land. Wait, there might be one on a state forest, but we unfortunately don't have any on a nature preserve. We'd like to change that. And Jonathan, we'd love to hopefully utilize your research to identify good sites to introduce reflexum onto an appropriately located preserve.
So I think we're going to end just to keep on track. There were some questions, if anyone wants to put answers in the chat about like what can be done with reducing mowed grass and trainings, but we're going to break for 5 minutes. It can be pretty exhausting, even though we learn a lot. It can be pretty exhausting to be on a Zoom meeting for 4 hours. So what I'll do is I'll just share the screen of the agenda, and we'll come back together at 11:10 and start the next talk. And thank you, Devin. It was great.
Thank you.